Welcome to Life L'Chaim. On today's episode, we're in studio with outspoken Deputy Speaker of the Israeli Knesset, Danon, who talks about U.S.-Israel relations and his new book, The Will to Prevail. We'll be back with Speaker Danon right after these messages.
We're privileged to have with us in the studio today Deputy Speaker of the Israeli Knesset and Chairman of World Likud, Danon. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Appreciate you joining us, sir. I know you're very busy in your travels around the U.S., so there's some topics that we want to get to throughout our discussion today. The first of you just recently wrote this new book, Israel, The Will to Prevail. Why this book and why now?
Many times when I come to the US, I'm being asked, if there is an alternative to the two-state solution? I said, yes, let's speak about an alternative to the two-state solution. And in my new book, I put a new paradigm. I say, enough with the ideas of land for peace, concessions. I'm putting a new paradigm for peace, which basically speaks about a three-state solution, where there will be no Palestinian state. And also now when we hear about the relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Barack Obama, in my book I analyze the relationship between Washington and Jerusalem, not only now, but I go back from 1948 until today, and I prove that in order to prevail, Israel must do what is better, what is good for Israel. And we should not try to satisfy anyone, not even the President of the US.
Your book is, there's a great history lesson. It talks about pre-Israel to present day and takes us through the journey of independence and all the discussions that surround that. So when we characterize the Middle East, let's talk about the Middle East just in the past couple of years, from the beginning of the Arab Spring. How would you characterize that difference from where it was?
First of all, I beg to differ with you. What is an Arab Spring?
Okay.
Spring sounds so beautiful, something new coming to life. It's an Arab winter. It's chaotic, it's problematic. And what we see what's happening today in the Middle East, it shows to us Israelis and to the American people that there is no democracy evolving. We see Islamic regime taking forces in Egypt, probably in Syria as well, in Libya. We saw what happened in the embassy in Benghazi, and we have to be very worried. And that is my main thing. We have to understand that the Middle East, it is not the US. And when President Obama came to Cairo in June 2009, delivered a very nice speech, he tried to convince the Middle East that something new will evolve. Look what's happening today.
With respect to the Arab winter, could it have been stopped? Could it have been changed?
I don't know if we could have stopped it, but I think when those countries saw weakness coming from Washington, we saw what happened. And the US must be strong. And in Israel, we want the US to be a strong nation, that the enemies are fearful from the US. And today we do not see it. We see that the enemies of the US are not afraid anymore. And the only closest ally, Israel, we are not sure we can rely on the US when we have to decide or when we have to take action against Iran.
How would you characterize the relationship between the current administration and the current government of Israel?
Well, first of all, we have a strong relationship between the people. We share the same values, the same future, the same enemies. So I do see a lot of ties between the American people and the Israelis. Regarding the administration, I think President Obama, he changed something we have been used to. We saw, and in my book, I compare President Obama not to President Bush, to President Clinton, who was another Democrat president. President Clinton tried to mediate between us, the Israelis, and the Palestinians, and he worked very hard. He was not successful. President Obama tried to dictate. He came and said you should do 1, 2, and 3. You should go back to the 1967 lines. You should make concession. It doesn't work that way. We saw it. We signed the Oslo Accord almost 20 years ago in the White House. Look what happened. What happened with the Oslo Accord? It's finished. Nobody cared about the ceremony that was signed in the White House. So we happen to be very cautious about what we are hearing from Washington.
But there are obviously there are 2 points of view in this country, at least, in terms of the U.S.-Israeli relations, and certainly the Democrats and the left will talk about how it's never been stronger, that the strength among the militaries, our combined militaries, has never been stronger, that the relationship is very strong, that all of this talk in terms of a harmful relationship between Mr. Netanyahu and Mr. Obama is just created for political benefit of the Republicans?
First of all, I don't think it's Republicans or Democrats. Myself and the Israeli government, we are very good friends among the Democratic Party. And when Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke, he got standing ovations from both sides of the aisles. But we do have some issues with President Obama. He was the one who was trying to change the policy regarding Israel. He took a different approach in the Middle East. So I think it's not about the parties. I think it's more about the personality of the president who tried to do something. It didn't work. You cannot apply your norms and values into the Middle East the way he tried to do.
You felt that President Obama, and you write this in your book, made some key mistakes right from the beginning. What were those mistakes?
We live in a very tough neighborhood. First of all, Israel it's beautiful. You know, it's a lovely country. I bring up my 3 children there, and I enjoy it every day. But we have tough neighbors, and we have hundreds of millions who are not happy about the presence of Jews in the Middle East. And in our neighborhood, if you show weakness, they're coming after you. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what President Obama did. He showed weakness. He reached his hand, but they saw that in this hand he has no weapon. He's not willing to fight, and they saw it as a sign of weakness. In the Middle East, when you reach one hand, you have to hold something else in the other hand. It didn't happen, and I think today we see those forces are getting stronger, and the Islamic forces are getting stronger and stronger, and we have to stand and fight them together. Israelis, Americans, Europeans, because we are fighting about values, about freedom. They are going after us only because we are there. We are the first one in lines. Mm-hmm. We are in the front line. But they will go after you. In Iran, they say first we will go after the Saturday people, meaning the Jews, but then we will go after the Sunday people, the Christians. So we have to fight together and not to wait until, God forbid, they will start with us.
But you go into a little bit greater detail on what those weaknesses are. I mean, you define them in your book, and you talk about how that it all started wrong, in your opinion, when he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize for the Middle East.
Absolutely. How can you receive a Nobel Peace Prize a few weeks after you're being elected for the achievement of negotiation in the Middle East? What negotiations? So after he received the prize, he had to prove that he deserved it. And in order to achieve it, he was trying to force it. It didn't work. He should have said, wait, let me work a few years on the Middle East, and maybe one day I will take this prize. But it's not an instant solution in the Middle East. We learned, and we paid a heavy price, that it takes time. And it's not a business deal. It's not about, well, Israel will do that, you will take out the settlements, the Palestinians will come, we will break a deal. That's the American way to make business. It doesn't work that way in the Middle East. If you show weakness, you cannot go anywhere. We saw it what happened in Gaza. We pulled out from Gaza completely, and we got missiles flying into Israel. So it is much deeper than what Israel is willing to pay.
We have a lot to talk about, and again, we appreciate your time, but we're going to be back right after these messages. We're back with Deputy Israeli Knesset Speaker Danon. Sir, you address some other mistakes that you felt, and certainly the Cairo speech of the president, which was both remarkable from many people and also criticized to a significant degree. What was, in your opinion, the mistakes of the Cairo speech?
I think mainly the approach. President Obama came with a new approach where he said, I know what should be done. I will explain to the natives what they have to do. Israel should go back to the 1967 lines, there should be a Palestinian state, and leave me alone. And when the Palestinians saw that they can achieve everything without giving anything, without stopping the incitement, without recognizing Israel, without taking real steps towards peace, they said, why should we negotiate? We should go to the UN unilaterally and achieve a Palestinian state. They climbed a very, very high tree, and today it's almost impossible to bring them down. And I think that was the main mistake. He should have pushed us to sit down, to facilitate the negotiations, but not to come and to tell us that's what you should do. And when he actually spoke later on about going back to the 1967 lines, that is another new. Other presidents maybe thought that way, but they will never came and say that's what will be the outcome of the negotiations. He is drawing the map of the negotiations. I think we don't have a partner, and President Obama is already coming up with a fixed agreement and telling us to sign it. With whom should we sign it? With the Hamas organization? In my book, I have a lot of criticism, but there is one part where I speak highly about President Obama, and that is when he decided to kill Osama bin Laden. I think it was a brave decision. But you know, there was one leader that condemned President Obama for this decision. That was Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of the Hamas. And I write in my book that he said, how could you kill one of the great leaders of the Muslim world? And in one hand, you're killing Osama bin Laden. On the other hand, you're telling us, go sign an agreement with those people, sit down with them. It doesn't work that way. If you fight Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas, you do it in Afghanistan and in Gaza.
Let's talk a little bit about Islamic fundamentalism. Do you have a belief that it is extreme, or do you believe that Islamic fundamentalism is more mainstream?
I think it is extreme, but it is getting support and is becoming more powerful because you don't see other forces around. So when the other forces are not around, the extreme forces are taking over. Look at Libya, for example, Egypt. Maybe the majority is not there. They are not happy, but they are not able to do something. And the extreme forces are vocal. They use globalization, and they are taking over. And unfortunately, if you're talking about trends, I think that we will see that the trends of the Arab Spring or Arab Winter, we will see more Islamic forces, radical forces taking over.
What is Israel's relationships with other governments outside of Egypt and Jordan in the Middle East?
Well, I can tell you it's complex, but when you read WikiLeaks, and you, for example, the issue of Iran, and you understand that it's not only the problem of Israel, that Iran will become nuclear. Saudis, Egyptians, Jordanian, they are very worried as well, and they approach the US as well to take action. And you look what happened in the last 4 years, Iran is one step before becoming nuclear capability, and we are not seeing real sanctions, crippling sanctions. You see the riots in Iran. I think if the US and the UN would have put really crippling sanctions, we would have seen a different reality today in Iran.
Certainly along those lines, with respect to Iran, certainly Prime Minister Netanyahu, when he appeared before the UN, made a very strong case for a red line. Does Israel have a red line?
Absolutely. We say it very clearly, and we will take care of the threat coming from Iran with or without the US. We did it in the past in 1981, and we are capable to do it again. But it should not be the burden of Israel to deal with Iran by itself. It should not be the war of Jews against Iran. It should be a global effort, because Iran is a threat not only to Jews in Israel. Iran is a threat for the American people. We saw it in 9/11, when Al-Qaeda chose to attack New York City and not Tel Aviv City. So you cannot ignore Iran. Maybe you think today, well, it's not in my backyard. Why should I care about the Middle East? It is in your backyard, because when you hear Ahmadinejad, he's saying it very clearly. First I will go after Israel, the little Satan, but then I will go after the US. So you cannot just ignore them.
Mm-hmm. Did the US administration push the red line back for Israel to act?
We have some disagreements, but even the officials in Washington will tell you that 2013 is the end game. So you can argue whether it will be May or September or November, but in 2013 we have to take a decision.
So following this election, at some point, whether there's US support or not, Israel will act?
Absolutely. I don't know if we will act by ourselves or it should be will be a joint effort, but 2013, it is in the end game. And I think maybe Prime Minister Netanyahu called for early elections, because when you get the mandate and the support from the people, you are able to take strong decisions. And he didn't want to take such a hard decision at the end of his term.
Will this cause World War III?
I don't know. I don't think so. I read what people said before we attacked the reactor in Iraq, and it sounds very scary. And afterward, nothing happened. So I don't think Iran today will pose a global threat to all the world, but it will not be pleasant in the Middle East for a while. But I prefer to deal with the threat today and not to let Iran to become nuclear, because then it will change the stability in the region and it will be not stable for the entire world.
Mm-hmm. What's the calculus of what other nations would do? What will Saudi Arabia do?
I think that Saudis and other countries cannot support Israel officially. But if you ask them quietly, they will be very happy and they will feel stronger if they will know that Iran is not becoming nuclear. Because you have to understand, if Iran is nuclear, why Egypt should not be nuclear? Mm-hmm. Why Saudi Arabia should not be nuclear? Some of those countries have the means to pay, and they can pay the Russians or other countries. It will start a new era in the Middle East, and we do not want to be there.
Is there somebody asking them quietly if they will?
Well, I cannot refer on that, but if you go to WikiLeaks and you see the conversations between the diplomats coming from the US to those countries, you understand that they are worried about Iran.
We're going to take a break right now, but when we come back, we're going to talk about your roadmap for the future peace for Israel and peace for the Middle East. We'll be right back. We're back in studio with Deputy Director Danon of the Israeli Knesset. Sir, again, it's a privilege.
It's my pleasure.
In talking about the roadmap for peace going forward, there's a little history that I found very intriguing in the book. When you talk about that seminal moment of the Six-Day War in 1967, the perception of Israel before the war and the perception of Israel after the war. What is that?
It is adds to a lot of what people perceive of you. And the Arab countries, when they feel that we are weak, they are attacking us. Unfortunately, every few years we have to engage in a conflict. It is not pleasant. You think about the amount of money we are putting into our defense. We are a small economy, but it happened in 1948, 56, 67, 73, and now every once in a while we have to engage in a conflict. I think in 67 we proved that when we take the right decision at the right time, we can prevail. On the other end, look at the Yom Kippur War, 1973, when Golda Meir, the Prime Minister, was afraid to take a preemptive attack or to call the reserves because she was afraid from the response coming from Washington. She was afraid from Eric Kissinger, who was very strong at that time. And she said, well, we cannot do it to the US. Let's wait. That was a mistake. Because she waited, because of the pressure coming from the US, we paid the lives for the more 2,000 people who passed away in that war. We cannot do it again. Even if it means that you have to come and to tell to the American president or administration, no, we cannot do what you want us to do. Mm-hmm. In the long run, I think it will be for the benefit of the US as well.
So you believe that the two-state solution that has been promoted for all this time is just a mistake?
I think it's about time to speak about a new alternative. It doesn't work. We signed the Oslo Accord almost 20 years ago, and it doesn't go anywhere. And the idea that land for peace, if Israel will give land, we will receive peace, we tried it, it didn't work. It is about time to speak about a new paradigm, and that's what I'm putting in the book, a new paradigm for peace. Long term. It's not going to happen tomorrow. Mm-hmm. People ask me, well, the Jordanians will not accept it. Maybe not today. I'm talking about a long term. Let's put it on the table. And in my long-term vision, Israel will apply Israeli sovereignty over the majority of the land in Judea and Samaria, the Jewish communities and the vacant land. And the Palestinians, the inhabitants, will not be part of Israel. They will be connected into Jordan. We will have to negotiate with Jordan, with the Palestinian. But that is a long-term vision. Building a Palestinian state, it's creating a terror entity in our backyard. Al-Qaeda state. Exactly what you see today in Gaza. Mm-hmm. Ask yourself whether you want to see it in your backyard. In Florida, in Chicago, in Washington. No one wants to see Al-Qaeda state in his backyard. Neither do us.
You refer to Judea and Samaria. and the mainstream of media refers to it as West Bank, and certainly you talk about Jewish communities, and the mainstream media refers that to settlements. So is your terminology that you use in your book, is it commonplace in Israel, or is it your point of view?
I think we're starting to see a change. I think we should work and fight on those issues. When I wrote an op-ed to the New York Times, it took me a while to convince them that I will not write settlements. People here think about the settlement, it sounds so bad. But when you come and you see the Jewish communities, you see lovely neighborhoods. It has nothing to do with taking land from anyone. And also, you know, when you're talking about perception, do you know what is the actual percentage of the land that we occupied, what's so-called occupied, that we have Jewish homes on the ground in Judea and Samaria? It is only 3%, unfortunately. I wish it was 90%. But people think about settlements, it sounds something so big that we took all the land. It is not the case. And I think we have to speak about rights. And I do write about the biblical rights we have in the land. Whether you're Christian or Jews, we believe in biblical rights. I speak about the legal rights, going back to the Balfour Declaration, San Remo Accord. You go back to the legal rights, historical rights, the presence of Jews in the land. And I added a new idea. I call it the common sense right. We won the war. When you win the war, you do not give a prize to the aggressor. And that's exactly what happened. In 1948, we accepted the UN decision. They fought against it, and they wanted a prize. Same in 1967. It doesn't work that way. In the US, when you had a war with Mexico, you didn't give Arizona back to the Mexicans because they lost the war. So I think we should speak about rights and not about occupations or giving away settlements.
Why has Israel lost, or certainly losing, this perception of what is right and wrong for Israel and peace in the region?
I think some people are fed up with the Middle East. They say, let's finish with that, let's cut a deal. But they have to understand it has nothing to do with payment. It is much deeper. When you look for reasoning for the attack in 9/11 or the attack in Benghazi against the ambassador, no reasoning. The ambassador was helping those people. He came to support them. Same in Israel. People have to understand that it is not about finishing the conflict. Let's cut a deal. It's much deeper than that. And I think it is hard, but we have to tell to the Israelis first, but also to our friends in the US, it's not a short-term conflict. We will have to fight, and my children will have to fight also, because those people are not going in a direction that they want to achieve peace. So we need to have the stamina and the willing to fight.
Many people say that you say what Bibi Netanyahu thinks. Is that correct?
Well, I value the Prime Minister's opinion. We do agree on a lot of issues. Sometimes we do not agree. For example, the issue of the building freeze in Judea and Samaria, which I opposed. But I think the majority of Israelis, not only the Prime Minister, after the disengagement from Gaza, because we argued a lot whether land for peace should work or not. But when we pulled out from Gaza, we took out the synagogues, we took out the Jewish homes, and we saw it's not getting us anywhere. Many people, including the Prime Minister, understand today that it is much deeper than land for peace.
Mr. Danon, again, a privilege, and I just urge people to go out and get Israel, The Will to Prevail, for a great history lesson and a great discussion of the potential future for the Middle East.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Next time in Jerusalem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition. For more information on our show, please visit us on the web at tolifelachayim.com. I'm Lee Lazerson. Thank you very much for joining us. And to life, l'chaim.